Hello, everybody. Before we begin, just let me remind you to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking to help cut down any background noise. Also, just so you're all aware, we are recording as well as live streaming on YouTube today. Welcome, everyone, to our joint forum hosted by the Congressional Western Caucus and the Oversight and Reform Committee Republicans, titled Holding the Biden Administration Accountable for Skyrocketing Prices and Failing Energy Policies. I want to thank our members and our witnesses for making time out of your busy schedules today to talk about an issue that truly affects all of us, that of rising energy prices. A special thank you to the Republican leaders of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Ranking Member Comer, and the Environment Subcommittee Ranking Member Norman, for partnering with the Western Caucus to highlight this really important issue. This past year presented the United States with an opportunity to capitalize on our energy and climate leadership by investing into domestic energy production. When businesses started reopening, people returned to work and our economy started to rebound. Our demand for energy increased. This opportunity was squandered by the Biden administration. Instead of investing in domestic energy production, the Biden administration restricted its supply while demand continued to grow. This was evident by the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, the ban on federal oil and gas leases, as well as new legislative proposals by congressional Democrats that ban offshore drilling while nickel and diming the oil and gas industry. These policies have resulted in skyrocketing energy prices and underinvestment in baseload energy resources such as oil and natural gas. The reckless, irresponsible, and conflicting actions of this administration have created uncertainty and confusion in U.S. energy markets, making it even more difficult for consumers to find reliable and affordable energy. Energy costs, gasoline, fuel oil, electricity, and pipeline gas were the top drivers of inflation in 2021, rising 29% from levels of 2020. Gasoline costs alone soared 50%. Fuel oil costs surged 41%. In 2021, overall U.S. inflation rose 7%, reaching levels that we've not seen since the year 1982. High energy, oil and gas prices are not a failure of industry, but rather a failure of anti-energy policies that have artificially restricted supply, with continued threats to handcuff industry's ability to provide affordable and reliable energy when people need it the most. I was proud to introduce legislation alongside Representative Buddy Carter, who you should hear from later in the forum, to help hold this administration accountable for their actions. We introduced the Make Energy Affordable Act, which requires the administration to justify and to explain their energy policies to the American people and develop a plan to mitigate the negative impacts. This is just one example of the congressional oversight we need. And we are here today to continue ensuring President Biden acts in the best interest of the families, small businesses, and the communities across the United States that we all represent. A strong economy should provide us with the confidence that we need to make sure we implement policies and support efforts that create both affordability for consumers and American energy security. That is what we are currently lacking. President Biden must unleash America's resource potential and protect our nationwide gains towards energy leadership, our national security, as well as climate progress. Instead, his policies are failing the American people. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today. So let's get right to it. I want to recognize the Vice Chair of the Congressional Western Caucus, as well as the ranking member of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Representative James Comer, for an opening statement. Welcome, James. Good to see you with us.
Well, Thank you, Chairman Newhouse, for working together with the Oversight Committee Republicans to convene today's important forum. It's a shame Democrats on the Oversight Committee are unwilling to hold a hearing on the skyrocketing energy prices affecting Americans. Last November, we wrote to Chairwoman Maloney requesting a hearing on this subject, but we still haven't gotten a response. In the meantime, Democrats have been busy attacking America's domestic energy production and pushing expensive Green New Deal policy dreams that are a nightmare for the American people. Gas prices are up over 40% since President Biden took office, and inflation is at a 40-year high. You would think Democrats would prioritize access to affordable energy for the most vulnerable populations they claim to support. But these people have been left in the cold by the Biden administration and congressional Democrats. I thank our panelists for appearing before us today to discuss the importance of ensuring that Americans have access to affordable and abundant American energy resources. To achieve this goal, it's critical that the U.S. government adapt policies that allow for our great American energy companies to produce domestic energy sources that will give our citizens electricity, heat their homes, and fuel their vehicles. However, I am concerned President Biden and his Democrat allies in Congress do not share this same goal. As a Republican leader of the Oversight and Reform Committee, I'm focused on highlighting waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government and ensuring that the policies of the government address the critical concerns of the American people. Through our work on the Oversight Committee, it's clear this country is not headed in the right direction on energy issues. When President Biden says he has no plan to address rising gasoline prices, it's clear this is an administration that is not committed to promoting an all-of-the-above energy solution in America. President Biden's pattern of actions on energy issues further solidifies this point. Since taking office, President Biden unilaterally vetoed the critically important Keystone Pipeline, placed a moratorium on oil and gas production on federal lands, and enacted policies that increase individual energy costs for American citizens. Simply put, President Biden's policies raise electricity costs for the American people and put American energy companies at a competitive disadvantage with the rest of the world. Just a few short years ago, the United States was experiencing an energy renaissance. We even became a strong exporter of oil and natural gas, allowing us to compete on the global stage. But President Biden's policies threaten the jobs and investment that hardworking Americans spent so long creating. President Biden and his Democrat allies have proven they are not equipped to deal with these issues. We need leaders who are willing to work with industry and confront the policy issues that are at the forefront of Americans' minds. Working with my colleagues on the Western Caucus, I believe we can provide these solutions. So today I look forward to hearing from industry leaders about what plans they have to address rising costs of gasoline, electricity, and heating oil, how companies are voluntarily working to limit emissions, and what policies we should enact to allow for sustained job growth. And moving forward, I'm hopeful we can continue to work together to establish energy policies that benefit all Americans. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for those insights, Mr. Comer. Now I would like to turn it over to Representative Ralph Norman. Ralph is the ranking member of the Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on the Environment. Mr. Norman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Newhouse and Ranking Member Comer, for convening this very important forum on American energy. You know, James Comer and I had a hearing of oversight earlier today where the Democrats James, I think it was for the second or third time, were grilling an American company over their profit. This company was the only one that made the product. This company is only 6% of the revenues, and they had to go through basically questions that any American company should not have to go through for the second time. Yet, and this was mentioned, where is the oversight hearing on the $80 billion that was left in Afghanistan? Where's the oversight hearing on Hunter Biden's outlandish fees for his so-called paintings? Where is the oversight, with the cities all across this country that were ravaged to the tune of $1 billion? Yet they make the claim that they are against greed, but they're after American companies that pay American taxes and hire Americans to work. But anyway, we'll live to fight another day. The folks represented us today, I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the fact that we are now, we pay good paying jobs here in America. We secure affordable, clean energy, as has been said, something that the Biden administration is simply not going to do. I sit on the Oversight Committee as a ranking member on the Environmental Subcommittee, and I've learned firsthand that the Democrats are focused on destroying our domestic energy industry and jobs, and provides, and distracts us from the facts. They have no plan. They want to put it out of business. Dan, the minerals that they are banning in Western states affect my industry. They don't understand that when you can't get copper, when you can't get aluminum, these industries don't all of a sudden just come back. They're shutting it down, or have for the last 9 months. This administration's out of control spending is causing inflation to skyrocket. As a result, Americans are now paying more for goods and services while taking home less money in their paychecks. Just last week, the Department of Labor stated that over the past 12 months, inflation has increased by 7%. When the Biden administration left office, inflation was 1.5%. The president continues to do nothing about the supply chain crisis that Americans are facing. Bare shelves Biden is focused more on dismantling procedural rules in the Senate than he is on getting food quickly and affordably to all Americans. Meanwhile, China and other countries around the world continue to pollute at record levels while the United States continues to reduce our emissions. Do Democrats really believe that putting the oil and gas industry out of business will suddenly make China less of a polluter? I'm afraid extreme proposals by Democrats will do nothing but destroy good-paying American jobs and ruin our economy. That has been their record. The price of gasoline today, as James mentioned, is over $1 more than it was this time last year. We're paying it to OPEC nations, which are 15 countries that don't like us, Iraq, Iran, and people all over the district are asking me why. Why is he doing this? It's been a train wreck from day one. The oil and gas industry provides good paying jobs or used to provide good paying jobs that help Americans have reliable heat for their houses, power for their cars, and keep their lights on through the storm and when the sun doesn't shine. The United States has an abundant 100-year clean energy natural resources. We must use these resources to advance American interests while continuing to lead the world in emission reductions. This is the path forward, but Democrats want to block it at every chance they get. I look forward to hearing from our esteemed panel today to learn about how we can voluntarily reduce emissions and how we can work with them to enact policies that assist them to grow their businesses. I want to thank each one of you for appearing today, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norman. Appreciate those comments. So let's get to it. We are just delighted to have some very informed individuals today providing us testimony. So I'd love to start those panel discussions. First off, let me introduce our first witness, Ms. Leslie Beyer. Ms. Beyer has served in multiple leadership roles on Capitol Hill. She's been in the executive branch and in private industry, primarily, I understand, in the energy sector. She currently serves as the CEO of the Energy Workforce and Technology Council, where she leads the government affairs and workforce programs. Ms. Beyer, welcome. You are recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Chairman Newhouse and distinguished members of the Western Caucus and the House Oversight and Reform Committee. Thanks for inviting me to share the perspective of the energy services sector here today. I am the CEO of the Energy Workforce and Technology Council. That is the National Trade Association for the energy, technology, and services sector. We represent over 450 companies employing more than 600,000 energy workers, manufacturers, and innovators in the energy supply chain. So our companies provide the world with energy in the most environmentally safe, efficient, and responsible way possible. And our sector is leading the development of technology that will drive the energy transition. Our membership includes large oilfield services providers with global operations, as well as small family-owned well servicing companies that operate locally all over the U.S. So the energy services sector and the technology piece of that are the solution providers in the aim towards a lower carbon future, not the enemy. And the men and women of our sector have the ability to provide the U.S. with the energy that it needs to power our economy and maintain our standard of living. However, the series of policy decisions by this administration have targeted the U.S. oil and natural gas industry, inhibiting domestic production and therefore damaging significant jobs in the services sector. Shortly after President Biden took office, the administration instituted the 8-month moratorium on new leases for energy production on federal lands. The House also reported out legislation that would impose a new fee on methane and increased royalty fees for oil and gas production on federal lands, which was essentially a new tax on domestic energy production. That language would have raised the cost of energy even further in the U.S. and led to higher prices at the pump for all Americans. The administration and Congress should champion our domestic industry instead of encouraging OPEC and other foreign producers to increase production. No one produces energy cleaner, safer, and more secure than the U.S. So to replace the American energy with foreign sources of energy not only hurts our economy, but in many instances will increase, not lower, carbon emissions. Europe is already seeing the consequences of extreme energy policies, resulting in critically low supplies and huge spikes in gas prices. And we'll face a similar scenario here if the administration doesn't reverse course. For our environment, our national security, and our way of life, it's imperative that the American people continue to have access to the abundant energy resources that we're blessed with here in the U.S. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. has enough energy to be totally self-sufficient. Our energy production grew by nearly 6% in 2019, while energy consumption decreased by 1%, with production exceeding consumption on an annual basis for the first time since 1957. Total energy production declined by about 5% in 2020, but was still about 3% greater than consumption. Meanwhile, the EIA expects worldwide energy demand to grow 47% over the next 3 decades, with demand for natural gas growing 31% from 2020 to 2050. So our choice is simple. We can continue to produce American energy to satisfy the growing domestic and global demand and ensure that Americans have access to affordable, reliable, and abundant energy for years to come, or we can continue to play politics with a key element of our economy. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. I look forward to answering any questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ms. Beyer. Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Kathleen Sgamma. She's the president of the Western Energy Alliance. The Alliance, as you probably know, but is the voice of the Western oil and gas industry. Ms. Sgamma has been with the Alliance for, I think, 15 years. Previously, Ms. Sgamma spent 11 years in the information technology sector and 3 years prior as a military intelligence officer in the United States Army. Kathleen, welcome, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and ranking members Comer and Norman and members of the committee and the Western Caucus. I really appreciate this timely topic, and I'm really glad to be going second because I don't need to repeat the great information that Leslie gave and talking about how this industry is the key for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping with that transition. So I'm going to just get right down to what I think is a key and, well, I shouldn't say easy, but it should be an easy way for this administration to encourage new production, new development, not just on federal lands, because we know that this moratorium is still in place because not a single lease sale was held on federal lands in 2021. So it wasn't an 8-month moratorium or leasing ban. It's continuing until there's an actual onshore sale held. But, you know, we saw those market reactions immediately to the initial announcements of the president on Keystone and banning leasing. And so that sent a message of regulatory and political risk to the markets. But that follows a trend of the last several years where activist shareholders have help to decapitalize the industry. And as a result, we're not able right now to respond to the market signals, to the higher prices, and increase production accordingly so that we bring those prices down because of those uncertainties in the marketplace. And so this administration has come in with an intention using the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Labor, and other agencies to regulate the financial markets in such a way that they elevate political considerations over what should be material market factors. In other words, elevating climate change risks over actual return on investment and actual market factors. And so we're seeing that the markets are anticipating more regulation in that space, which will insert that political factor into financial decisions. So the single biggest thing this president could do right now, and I mean, I'm not naive, I don't expect it to happen, but if we really wanted to stop going to Russia and OPEC, he could just say, hey, we're going to back off on regulations at the SEC and others that will elevate climate change over affordable, reliable energy for Americans. And so by backing off of those regulatory efforts, it would send an immediate signal to the market, and we would start to see this reverse of this decapitalization of the industry. And if we were able to get more capital, we could respond to the market today, and we could lower prices for consumers. So that would be the one action I would ask this administration to undertake. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to share that thought and hopefully answer some questions later. Thank you.
Great, Kathleen. Thank you. Let me now lean on Vice Chair Comer. Would you mind introducing our next two witnesses, Jamie?
Yes, that'd be my pleasure. I'll begin with Mr. Thomas Pyle. Thomas Pyle is the president of the American Energy Alliance, where he develops the organization's free market positions. Before joining the private sector, he held numerous Capitol Hill positions, including staff director for the Congressional Western Caucus, which he now speaks in front of today. I want to thank him for participating in today's forum, and I look forward to hearing his thoughts on the value of market-driven solutions.
Thank you so much, Chairman Newhouse, Ranking Member Comer, Ranking Member Norman, and the members. The American Energy Alliance is one of the largest pro-consumer, pro-taxpayer, and free market grassroots organizations in the nation. And as mentioned, as a former director of the Western Caucus, I'm really honored to be here. As you've probably seen, there's a meme going around on the internet called "How It Started, How It's Going." And unfortunately for American families, just over 1 year into the Biden administration, just 1 year, sorry, it's not going so well. President Biden is presiding over the worst inflation in decades. As the chairman stated, over the last year, lumber prices have increased by 91%, heating oil by 61%, natural gas, WTI, and gasoline by over 50%, aluminum, Brent, and cotton by over 40%, and corn and wheat by nearly 20%. Much of this is due to what we at the Alliance call greenflation. That is, energy prices are increasing because investments in natural gas, oil, and coal are limited, even though these sources provide about 84% of today's energy. But just don't take my word for it. Isabel Schnabel, a member of the European Central Bank, said, quote, "As at present, renewable energy has not yet proven sufficiently scalable to meet rapidly rising demand. The combination of insufficient production capacity of renewables in the short run and subdued investments in fossil fuels mean that we risk facing the possibility of a protracted transition period during which the energy bills will be rising." So when green-minded European central bankers talk about renewables being unable to scale quickly enough, you know we have a problem. Since day one of his presidency a year ago, President Biden has fought against domestic natural gas, oil, and coal production. First, he canceled the Keystone Pipeline, giving thousands of union workers a pink slip. Since then, he's stalled production on federal lands. He's threatened gasoline marketers with FTC investigations. He's threatened new taxes on oil and gas, pipelines, carbon and methane. He's urged financial regulators to clamp down on funding for conventional energy, and he's effectively cut off new supplies of oil from Alaska. Now, before Biden took office, the US became the world's #1 energy superpower. From 2010 through 2019, global total petroleum production increased by 12.1 million barrels a day. For the same time period, US production increased by 9.77 million barrels a day. In other words, the US alone covered 81% of the total increase in global production over those 10 years. And yet the Biden administration is working to restrain domestic production and thus helping to drive greenflation through the entire economy. At the same time, they've blocked new mining projects, as was mentioned, in Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, making us dependent on China for the mined minerals necessary for what we at AEA call the forced energy transition. Biden's policies are designed to increase the price of energy. They're designed to drive greenflation, and that's exactly what we're getting. And that's a bad deal for American families. Thank you very much. Look forward to questions.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Heather Reams. Heather is the president of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, an organization that engages policymakers and the public about responsible, conservative solutions to address our nation's energy security. Ms. Reams also serves on the board of directors for the American Conservative Coalition, a free market environmental group. I want to thank her for offering her insights at today's forum, and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you, Congressman. It's a delight to be with you all today. And what an important issue. As a organization that is an advocate for responsible conservative solutions to address our nation's energy, economic, and environmental security, and keeping America competitive, it's baffling that this administration continues to undermine our energy sectors time and again. And we've heard some really important statistics here today. My organization is an all the above organization. We support natural gas and we support nuclear, wind, hydro, solar, geothermal, energy storage. We support carbon capture technology, alternative fuel vehicles. We believe that the climate is changing and something needs to be done about it, and the U.S. can lead there. But we also believe that we should use every tool at our disposal, every technology and every energy source. And in fact, as many have said here today, the U.S. has abundant energy. We were just an energy exporter for a time under the previous administration. And we get to this administration, and it's mind-blowing that we're talking about OPEC. I heard OPEC and said, what's OPEC? I haven't heard about OPEC in 4 years. That we're importing, that we're putting our security into hostile nations. And these are also nations that do not supply energy that is not as clean as the United States. We have the most efficient, cleanest, safest workforce in America. And instead, we are looking overseas to import, whether it's Russian natural gas that has a 40% increase, 40% larger carbon input than we have in the United States. We are importing minerals instead of mining them here in the United States for critical projects that will keep our economy humming. And then just specifics and talking about this administration is attacking fossil fuels. In the budget, they have lowering the cost of production to lower the cost of consumption of fossil fuels is a goal of this administration set out time and again. This isn't just that we guess it, we know it, we have it in writing. And it's giving clear signals to the markets that this administration is hostile to these corporations that are giving undergirding of the United States economy. I'll also note that instead of what we're seeing, press advocates for reducing energy prices, not our energy choices. That will more here in the United States, mining, looking for our natural resources, using our natural resources, using clean energy will lower our prices. We should be exporting America innovation, not American jobs, which this administration continues to do. And we should be shrinking our emissions, but at the same time, growing our economy. This is a booming industry. Energy is a booming industry with great paying jobs from coast to coast, rural and urban. And instead, we're undermining time and again. There is no strategic direction out of this administration. And putting everything under the call of climate change and we must reduce emissions. I'm an organization, represent an organization that does believe in climate change, but this is a wrong-headed approach. We must develop and export our resources and clean energy technologies without prejudice. And to have that happen, they have to be affordable, not just in the United States, but overseas. Our policies must recognize global realities and American interests. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, both Mr. Pyle as well as Ms. Reams, for your comments. Appreciate that very much. Ranking Member Norman, I'd like you to be able to introduce our next and final witness. Ralph?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. I'd like to introduce Katie Tubb, who is a senior policy analyst for energy and environmental issues at the Heritage Foundation. By the way, we had Kevin speak to our conservative opportunists today, and he did a great job. Ms. Tubb has written on subjects such as nuclear energy, climate change policies, and benefits of free market environmentalism. Appreciate your participation in today's forum, Katie, and look forward to your insights on this important topic. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you all for the invitation to speak this afternoon. I think it's a very important topic and we need to be talking more about it. So I want to start first with where we had been going in 2019. Americans' average total energy costs were down across the board about 5%, and per capita energy costs were down in every state but California, which should tell you a little bit about which direction we should and should not be going. I think it's been talked about a couple times here, but I want to, before I go further into the conversation, I want to not lose sight of why this matters. And it's that energy is essential to basically every good and service we engage in. So when you increase the price of energy, you're basically increasing the price of everything, whether we're talking about food or housing, a variety of manufactured goods, the cost of doing business, operating schools and hospitals, and the many other things that make up our daily lives. So that's why this matters. It's not that we're trying to increase the profits of X company or Y company. It's that this matters for everyday Americans. So why are energy prices increasing? Certainly, the pandemic, I think, is part of that, and particularly policy responses to the pandemic. Energy consumption fell 7% in 2020, and that's the largest annual decrease since at least 1949. So recovery, of course, is a thing, but I think to pin high energy prices just on a pandemic is to make a huge oversight. And I think we've heard some good examples of why that's the case. Policy, in my opinion, is severely inhibiting the ability of Americans to recover. And I'm talking about both existing legacy policies like the Renewable Fuel Standard and the Jones Act, but of course, policies under the Biden administration that are creating incredible risk in energy markets. Some examples, of course, are what's been mentioned already with the EPA and Department of Interior, Security Exchange Commission, Department of Labor, Department of Transportation, the social cost of carbon, which is basically a shadow carbon tax through every regulatory policy that the administration engages in, the Council on Environmental Quality's changes towards NEPA, and then, of course, members that the administration for the administration that have had a very vocal opposition to coal, oil, and natural gas. These resources provide 80% of Americans' energy needs and 91% of our transportation needs. So it's no surprise to me when the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee had the acting administrator for the EIA to come testify when they asked why energy prices weren't decreasing and why supply wasn't meeting demand. His response was that the industry is trying to position for the future and for the long term. To me, that said everything that needed to be said, that the industry does not know how to plan for a future when an administration is using basically every regulatory tool in the toolbox to put them out of business. I'll just end with EIA again, in that they have projections short and long term for domestic and global markets. And under no projection, they see a decrease in the use of oil globally through 2050, no matter what climate policy we or any other country pursues. And so I think that's how we need to go into this conversation, is with our eyes wide open and realistic about what the future holds and what Americans and the globe need for affordable, reliable energy. With that, I'll conclude there, but I think we can go into as many regulatory policies as you want, because it's a target-rich environment, and I appreciate Congress putting a lens on that so Americans understand that they are not the victims of a pandemic in this situation, but of poor policy. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Tubb. And thanks to all of our panelists for your contributions. I think we're going to have a great discussion. So let's get right into that. Let me just remind all the members that are on, we're going to have to put a 3-minute time limit on questions. We've got a long list of folks, so let's get right to it. I'm going to ask Vice Chair and Ranking Member Comer to go first. So Jamie, you get the honors.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to again thank our panel for participating today. This is one of the most important issues in America. Sadly, our Democrat counterparts haven't expressed any type of interest in providing any oversight, much less coming up with any solution. So I'm going to ask everyone on the panel a simple question that every American is wondering right now. What can be done about the rising price of gasoline? And whoever wants to start first, go ahead. Mr.
I don't
Pyle.
mind starting.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is that okay? I think Kathleen hit the nail on the head when she talked about the chilling effect that, regulation has on the markets. That is really what's kind of driving a lot of our access. Our companies, these exercises are capital intensive. In the service sector, we also need capital. And so I think, what could be done certainly is to maybe take a step back from all this onerous regulation and all this talk about really pushing back on fossil fuels. Even Larry Fink in his letter that came out, said, look, the fossil fuel industry can be a partner in our, goals to achieve lower carbon future. I think the administration needs to say, hey, we miscalculated, and we see this industry as a partner.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Certainly on the federal land side of this, gasoline, I guess I would say two things. First, you need supply. And so you have to talk about the federal lands issue there, that if the Biden administration is trying to totally overhaul the purpose of federal lands without the direction of Congress, that's a problem that Congress ought to be engaged in. The Build Back Better bill, I think goes in the exact wrong direction as far as increasing access to energy. But I think another thing we should talk about is refineries. 2021, we went into that year with our lowest refining capacity since 2015. That was because of closures, maintenance, and also refineries switching over to renewable fuels. I think across the board, the renewable fuel mandate has been a failure and has put incredible pressure on refineries, in addition to EPA regulations that have questionable environmental benefits. And so, if that's a choke point for producing products like gasoline, that's something I think worth our attention as well.
I'll just chime in real quick. So just do no harm. I mean, why is the government getting so involved in this space to the point where they're micromanaging it? And they're basically saying that we know best, as opposed to consumers in the industry, how to produce these resources in a way that is, we got the safest technologies in the world. We do this better than anybody else. So don't stand in the way, do no harm, don't blockade our transportation, and let the industry take over and do what they do best, which is provide these resources and jobs for the American economy.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Comer. Thank you, panelists. Let me go next to Ranking Member Norman. Ralph, you're up for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I want to urge the panelists to get pretty vocal, either by writing or by just voicing your opinion. Y'all have so much influence. I know those of us in Congress sometimes feel like we're hamstrung, we're hamstruck because we're not in power. But y'all have got in the private sector so much influence. Let me just start off if we could wave a magic wand and a conservative took over the White House, be it Democrat or Republican, how long would it take to reverse the policies of this administration, both from a natural gas and oil, and then from the minerals that our tax dollars have canceled the leases on? What kind of time frame would each of you think would be realistic to get this country back on track again?
I actually don't think it would take that long. Luckily, the administration has been slow to move forward with rulemakings. I think it's because they were kind of waiting for Build Back Better just to kill this industry. I mean, if the House passed version actually passed the Senate, flat out, no new development on new leases on federal lands. I don't know how anybody could have operated under all of those additional fees and costs. So if that magic wand was waved, it wouldn't take too long to just send the signals to the marketplace that it's okay to invest in oil and natural gas. It's okay because we're not going to raise all these additional costs on federal lands. And so we can get back to that record production that we saw in 2020 on federal lands and waters, for example. So, at this point, not too much has been baked in through the regulatory process, and that's a positive. But we did just lose a whole year of leasing on federal lands. So just moving forward with that, because that's going to hit future development and future production. But I think it's not too late to reverse many of these policies, thankfully.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I was just going to say, Congressman, that we saw what the use of a pen can do with an executive order. So some of these things could be changed on day one. And agree with Kathleen about although we've lost a year, it wouldn't take a year to gain back what we've lost.
That's exactly right, Heather. I mean, the stroke of a pen is done so much damage over the last 11 months. Finally, China. This administration thinks if we ask them to be nice, have they met any emissions control that they promised through this stupid Paris Accord or anything else? Any of you, real quick?
China builds a coal-fired power plant every day, almost at this point.
Every week, a new one opens up. Anybody else?
I think
Congressman, I was at COP and Scotland, and they didn't even show up to the Paris discussions. There. So, how seriously are they taking it? They're not even showing up.
Yes, sir.
Congressman, what they are doing is securing their energy future. They are basically, as you mentioned, making access to affordable energy a primary goal of their communist government. And at the same time, as been touched on, if this administration wants to transfer everything, the whole economy, or transform the whole energy economy to renewables and electric vehicles, for example, they aren't showing it because they're blocking mining here for the critical minerals that China practically, if not completely, has a monopoly on. So what, in essence, this administration is doing is asking us to trade our dependency away from our hard-fought independence from the Middle East and OPEC, and move over to be dependent on China for our energy. And that is the essence of the Biden energy policy from our perspective.
My final comment, we're following the same path as Venezuela did in their 10-year decline during the 70s. And it's unfortunate. It was based on the destruction of the energy supply chain. I yield back, Dan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Norman. Now I'd like to recognize Representative Issa from California. Daryl, are you with us? All right, we'll come back to Daryl. Next on the list, Representative Smith from the great state of Nebraska. Adrian, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the great insight here, expertise. I just want to add emphasis to the fact that current policies, as you know, out of the administration are hurting the very folks that the other side is saying and telling us that they're wanting to help. And to think we can just get rid of liquid fuels, whatever the feed source is, it is folly. And that effort does great harm to a lot of folks who can't afford it. So I'm glad that we can have a discussion like this to bring some important facts and data to the forefront. So I yield back. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next, from the great state of Ohio, we've got Bill Johnson. Sir, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Well, hey, thanks, Chairman Newhouse, and to both ranking members Comer and Norman. This is a really important forum today, and I appreciate you letting me be a part of it. The cost of everything is surging, from energy to groceries, and that's even if you can find groceries on the shelves in many places. And what are we getting out of the administration from Joe Biden and our Democrat colleagues? They're more focused on federal takeovers of elections disguised as voting rights and more reckless government spending that only causes President Biden's inflation to go even higher. So it's no secret that the Biden administration's outright contempt for fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, and coal, as well as the infrastructure needed to get those vital resources to market, is hurting the American people. I mean, you got to look no further than New England. It's cold up there right now. And the residents of New England are paying the price because far left politicians in those states are blocking pipeline infrastructure. And there's not enough natural gas for heating and power generation in that region. And this is an absurdity, given that the Utica and Marcellus shale formations, much of which reside under the feet of my constituents in eastern and southeastern Ohio, are so close by. But instead, New England's far left radical leadership would rather import LNG from Russia and burn fuel oil for their electric generation, both proven to be much dirtier than American natural gas. According to the Power Grid's website on January 16th, 31% of the New England region's electricity came from natural gas, 25% from coal, 25% from fuel oil, and renewables at 8%. But what do they classify as a renewable? 58% of the renewable mix was generated by burning wood and refuse or waste. I mean, you can't help but laugh at this. They're burning wood and trash and calling it renewable energy. So New England would rather burn wood and trash, both of which have much higher carbon emissions than clean natural gas in order to generate their electricity. So my question to our panelists, and again, thank you all for being here. As Republicans, do we need to be more assertive about our advocacy for reliable and affordable natural gas and coal baseload power? I mean, our opposition is currently burning wood and trash in progressive New England. Do we need to be more assertive, or are we missing something? Whichever of our panelists want to take a look at that.
I'm not sure how you could be more assertive. I think sometimes it's a willful choice. And at some point, I think reality just has to set in. And we're seeing that reality when New England has to import natural gas from Russia instead of getting it from Pennsylvania.
The problem is, Kathleen, is I'm not sure that they get it. And I'm not sure that they care. Because you don't hear much outcry from the citizens of those communities. And maybe that goes into my second question. Are we giving up too soon? I mean, saying that all energy is created equal and advocating for a, quote, all of the above strategy, which I have done since I got here in 2011, when really we know that the only true current sources of reliable and affordable baseload energy are natural gas, coal, and outside of fossil fuels, nuclear. Those are the baseload heavy lifters. And yet, we continue to say that we're an all of the above advocates for an all of the above strategy. Are we giving up too soon by taking that approach? Any of our panelists want to jump on that one?
Congressman, thank you. I just very briefly, all of the above that work, that makes sense, right? All of the above that provide what we've had up until recently, which is a pretty darn reliable system, right? The system was developed over dozens, if not, nearly 100 years. And we've had now with this transition, which I argue again is sort of forced on us as opposed to, happening through market forces, we're seeing reliability problems. And the irony of it, as you mentioned, is we don't need to burn oil to produce electricity, right? Look at what's happening in Europe right now. These folks, if you don't think they care now, they're sure going to care pretty soon. And a lot of these policies have been implemented in Europe well before we started implementing some of these policies. And I only hope it's really expensive. I hope that it doesn't lead in the loss of a lot of lives. And that's something that could happen in the very near future if these policies continue without us doing things, as Katie mentioned. Take a look at the Jones Act, permit these pipelines, get this infrastructure going, keep what we have that works, bolt on where it makes sense.
I've talked to, and Chairman Newhouse remembers, we had Secretary Granholm over at talking to our caucus not too long ago, and I pinned her down. She said, "Hey, our policy is to protect what we have and diversify." But when I went on to point out to her that they're not doing a very damn good job of protecting what we have, when they're shutting down and pausing domestic energy production on federal lands, when they're shutting down pipelines and restricting the ability to get the product to market, begging the Russians and OPEC to increase production so that we can decrease the cost of gasoline at the pump here. I pointed out to her that they're doing everything they can to do right the opposite of protecting what we have. Maybe we need to come up with a way of distinguishing between the left's only the above to a true all of the above.
Yeah, maybe so. Bill, thank you so much for your.
Thanks for, I yield back. Thanks, Chairman.
Appreciate it, Bill. Let's stay with Ohio. Next in the lineup is Mr. David Joyce. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Newhouse. I'm glad you're holding this important forum today, and I thank our witnesses for participating. The skyrocketing energy prices we've seen under this administration should serve as a reality check that anti-American energy policies and out-of-control spending habits have consequences that are burdening the American people. Just the other week, I polled 26,000 of my constituents about whether rising energy costs are impacting their households. Unfortunately, but not unsurprisingly, the overwhelming answer was yes. More than 86% of the respondents say they're paying a lot more to heat their homes and fill their cars. I've also heard from local elected officials back in Northeast Ohio pleading with Congress to address the increasing energy costs. Here's an excerpt from a letter that I had received from a local mayor from Lyndhurst, Ohio. Many have seen their natural gas budget nearly triple. A less painful rise in their electric costs has been noticed as well. For those driving, there's an added burden of what they must pay at the pump, which again is rising out of control. These impacts are not confined to the energy the residents personally consume, but to everything they need to live, all of which even if it is unattainable, costs more than it did just 1 year ago. Residents are distraught over the negative impact these rising costs are having on their lives and upon the outlook for their future. We need help. Congress needs to answer that call for help. But the reality is that we can't if the president continues to cancel leases for domestic energy production, kill American pipelines and the jobs they provide, and propose high taxes on oil and gas production here in the US, all while empowering foreign pipelines. One of the many lessons we've learned from COVID-19 pandemic is that we cannot rely on other countries for our critical resources. As a ranking member of the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee for the past 3 years, I've had and continue to have concern regarding the misguided efforts of my Democratic colleagues to curtail our nation's energy independence by limiting conventional energy development. So I'd like to pose this question to our witnesses. Can you please speak to how America's domestic energy and mineral production can help us transition to a cleaner energy future while keeping prices affordable for American families?
I'm happy to start on that. I think, if I can speak specifically from the services sector that I represent, a lot of the low carbon technology comes from the oilfield service providers. A lot of the methane detection, remote automation, everything that makes energy produced in a cleaner, more efficient way. A lot of that technology comes from our sector. And so that's why this industry, the traditional oil and gas industry, has to be the one to lead the way towards environmental goals. And a huge part of that we haven't really discussed yet that I wanted to make sure we did is the workforce piece. With the vilification of our industry that comes from this administration, we are at a war for talent. We're competing against other industries for the highly technical, skilled people that we need to come up with these technologies that are going to achieve environmental goals. So to your question, I would say, cleaner energy starts with us. It doesn't start in Silicon Valley. It starts with the people that understand scale and global demand. And we feel that we can deliver and that we haven't given up too early per the last question.
Well, and I would add that natural gas is the #1 reason the United States has reduced more greenhouse gas emissions than any other country. When we make it more difficult to produce American natural gas, we decrease the amount of electricity generated from natural gas, and that increases greenhouse gas emissions. So, that's pretty clear. We're responsible for 60% of the reduction in greenhouse gas that comes from the electricity sector over the last more than a decade now. And we've done more than wind and solar combined to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we've got a great record, and we're part of the energy mix well into 2050. So denying that reality only serves to increase US greenhouse gas emissions.
Great.
I'd also like to add, as you may know, the United States is only, in terms of its carbon footprint, is contributing about 11% of the emissions today. So what about the other 89% of the emissions and where it's coming from? We have to be clear-headed about what developing nations will and will not do. They're going to go for the lowest cost kind of fuel source. So if that's coal, they're going to go to coal. It's just a fact of the matter. It's developing. It's the difference between having energy and not having energy. You're going to get it any way you can. So why shouldn't the United States and its innovations be exporting that innovation overseas to lower emissions? It's just common sense. And then second, with regard to minerals and mining them here, all these technologies, these new technologies we're talking about, right down from your cell phone, but really for the energy production of solar or wind or battery storage, EVs, others, all require critical minerals. We have them here in the United States. We're not mining them in the United States, and this administration continues to want to export that responsibility and some kind of form of colonialism. It does not make sense. Again, there's no strategic direction from this administration.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joyce. Appreciate the questions. We're going to go to Mr. Stauber next, but I also want to let you know that after Pete, we have Glenn Grothman, Jody Heiss, and Liz Cheney on deck. So Pete, three minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair Westerman, and Ms. Sgamma, great to see you again. And and thanks for joining us today. You know, as ranking member of Energy and Minerals Resources, it has been frustrating to watch Biden's unlawful ban on oil and gas leasing hurt Americans directly, while the administration tries to blame everyone but themselves for this issue. Just a quick question. Could you please discuss the impact of the Biden ban on oil and gas and its downstream effects on places like my district in northern Minnesota and prices for gas and the price of gas?
Well, I know that, we've been through a year of the Biden ban on leasing. And from University of Wyoming study, we know that killed 32,700 jobs. And those jobs were in the oil and gas federal producing states. So 8 states in the West, have the 98% of federal development on them. So I'm not sure exactly what the impact is to northern Minnesota in a direct line. But when we don't produce about 9% of US natural gas and about 8% of oil, which comes from federal lands, then, that just raises prices for your constituents in your district. And so, we've all talked about here the increase in prices from this administration's policies.
I think that, you're exactly right. This administration's policies, have been devastating, to the middle and lower class in the form of paying more for gasoline at the pumps. And even though northern Minnesota, doesn't have or we don't extract or mine for oil and gas, it still affects us, and we're probably paying about 54% more, because of this administration than the Trump administration. And again, that hurts the middle class. Thank you very much for that answer. Ms. Reams, thank you again for joining us. And it was great to see you at the mining forum last week. It was a huge success, and you played a big part of it. So your expertise was appreciated, and your comments were professional. So we thank you for that. So a quick question: how would onshoring our critical mineral supply chains make energy more affordable for Americans instead of continuing to import minerals from places like Russia, China, or the Congo?
Well, there's so many things to say about that, but overall, mining here, and particularly in your district in Minnesota, it's closer to the consumer, closer to what we need. It's here. It's also done more cleanly, more reliably. But right now, we're mining in the Congo, and we're shipping it to China for processing, and then to the United States. This is a completely inefficient system. Instead, we could be mining here, having good American jobs here domestically, and growing our economy. That in a nutshell, but talking about the challenges in the Congo with child labor, and China with human rights abuses, not to mention just how their mining is not clean. In your district, I was struck by the fact that how conscientious the community is around protecting the environment, but also mining responsibly. Nowhere else in the world are we going to see that kind of consciousness and making sure we're balancing our energy needs as well.
Well, I think, as I discussed last week, the cleanest water in the state of Minnesota is in the heart of the mining district. We know how to do it. We've been mining safely for over 140 years. And I think that we have to recognize the opportunities we have in this great country. And we didn't have a choice in where these minerals were placed, or where the oil was placed. But I do think that we have such an opportunity, and your advocacy is so important. And I just encourage you both to keep up the advocacy. I know you will, but until this administration understands that we can be energy independent and mining dominant once again, just by having good policies and reforming some of our process, like our NEPA process. We know that we can do that. So I just want to thank you both for your expert testimony and your advocacy, and you two are so well respected, and I appreciate this opportunity. And Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Now we go to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman. Glenn?
Sure. I guess maybe Ms. Tubb or anyone else, I always think that the danger here is the degree to which, because we don't have the mainstream media and we don't have the horrible education system, that our young people do not understand what a clean source of energy we have in the United States and how much cleaner we are than places like China and India. Do you have any suggestions as to how, beyond like this sort of forum, how we can get the word out to the average person? I've always thought it'd be great if we could take out TV ads paid for by some of America's energy companies and explain how much cleaner American energy is than what's going on in India and China. Does anybody have any suggestions how we can get the next generation all on board with American energy?
I would say, if I could start, Congressman, thank you for that question. I mean, we as an industry start with education to the extent that we can reach students very early on. I know we personally fund a program at the middle school level in the Permian Basin, where you would think, these children in schools are learning all about the energy that comes from underneath their feet, and they learn that it's not clean. So we do what we can on that. But I think, to the extent that we can talk about how critical it is to modern life, that is on us. That's on the industry.
Do you think something can be done with social media?
I do,
Or
but
broadcast media?
I think that we haven't been successful with attempts through some of our peer groups, like API and others. I think there's been a lot of money spent on that hasn't landed well. I don't think there's going to be penetration on that message until there's a realization that this energy is clean, and that the rubber meets the road, and some of these.
I'll tell you what I'd like to have you do. This is my suggestion. You can tell me whether you do it or not.
Okay.
I'd like you to find a small media market, a city of 80,000 people or something like that. We got a bunch of Wisconsin, and do a campaign, like a political campaign, but an ad. First of all, you see what do young people think, answer questions about energy. Do we have a pollution problem in the country? Is it worse today than 50 years ago? That sort of thing. And see where people stand, and then do a combined social media and TV buy in a moderate sized city, Rockfield, Illinois, Lincoln, Nebraska, or something, and do a media campaign for a couple months, and then see if you've changed the way people feel about homemade energy. And I think you'd be surprised what a great job you could do on a relatively small buy. And once you were successful in a small media market, it would be easier to find money for larger media markets. Because I think our danger is always the young people. We aren't getting the young people because, of course, we're fighting the popular culture, and we're fighting the comedians, and we're fighting the horrible educators of this country. But I just wish it would be great if America's energy companies would address the true facts and persuade young people how much better off the globe would be if America increases its import or its production compared to allowing China and India to increase theirs. Is that something the industry you think would ever be interested in doing?
Yes, sir. I think they are. And I think a lot of them have done it through API, but I think now they are reaching out maybe to try and do their own community outreach. That's certainly a part of all their ESG requirements that they're all facing, that will certainly become more relevant for the publicly traded companies, what they're doing in stakeholder relations and community outreach. That's all part of that. And they will start investing in that more.
Okay, I would love to see it. I haven't seen it done yet. I don't know why America business is so quiet, or they take out these ridiculous ads that make it sound like we got a huge pollution problem, which really drives me up the wall. But I think if we got the public on our side, we wouldn't have a problem here, but they're just not on our side. But okay, well, thank you very much, and good luck on putting together some sort of media buy.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much. Awesome question. Next, we're going to go to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, and then following Jody will be Cheney, LaMalfa, Lesko, and Keller. Jody, the floor is yours.
So much. Appreciate ranking members Comer and Norman and Chairman Newhouse. Appreciate y'all putting this together, and for each of our panelists, thank you all for being here with us today. The thing that I know I'm not alone in this, but what concerns me so much is the fact that President Biden shut down the Keystone Pipeline, which, as we all know, cost thousands of jobs here in America. He hamstrung our domestic oil production and limited access to federal lands. As we all know, massive regulations were put on and on the energy industry as a whole. And promoting the Green New Deal, all these kinds of things have been devastating to our economy, and all of our constituents are feeling it at the gas pump, heating bills right here in the middle of winter, all these type of things. But then you add to all of that, the most egregious part of this whole thing in terms of the administration's policies and decisions is the decision to allow Russia the same Russia, by the way, that at any moment, literally, could invade the Ukraine, but to allow them to build Nord Stream 2 pipeline, really holding hostage so many in Europe. And here, I just can't, I still cannot wrap my brain around that. We shut down our own energy production and allow our enemies to hold hostage Europe. And now we're in the situation having to buy oil from many of our adversaries, putting money in their pocket, not the least of which is Russia itself. And this is just unthinkable to me, what this administration has allowed to get done. And if anyone thinks this is a good idea, I mean, how can anyone actually come to that sort of conclusion? And so the national security interests, I think, really is where I'm heading with all of this. And I just want to throw this out, Katie, to you, Ms. Tubb. This whole issue of reducing our own energy independence while at the same time allowing some of our adversaries, geopolitical strategies of countries like China and Russia to get a foothold. How do you see this picture? What does this whole thing look like to you, and how does it impact our national security?
That's a huge question. I think it's just on its face very inconsistent and confusing to Americans, as it should be. Canada is one of our best trading partners, a longtime ally. And so the Keystone Pipeline situation was not only frustrating for Americans, but also for Canadians, including the Canadian government. And I think that tells you a lot about where this administration's priorities are. As far as Nord Stream 2 and the situation there, I think, Europe gives us a lot of things to learn from. They're further down the road in their commitment to net zero electricity policy and what they have done to shut down affordable, reliable electricity resources, make it very difficult to access their own energy, and increase costs for conventional energy while subsidizing other politically favored sources of energy. And what they find themselves in today is they have ruled out so many options that they are over-reliant on natural gas, such that they are now quite vulnerable to the Russia situation. And I think that's quite the warning for us in the United States as President Biden continues to push us further down the road of what Europe has already chosen, that we need to look at the consequences of that, both in terms of costs, but also what we're making ourselves vulnerable to. And I don't think we want to go down that road.
I agree with you. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Heiss. Appreciate that. Now the Congresswoman from the great state of Wyoming, Liz Cheney. Ms. Cheney, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks to you for hosting this and to Jody as well, and to Ralph. Thank you for your efforts and thank you for drawing attention to this critically important issue. I was pleased to hear Kathleen mention the University of Wyoming study and the job losses that we've seen from the Biden administration's policies. And it's really, as you all have been discussing, a devastating situation, particularly for us in Wyoming, where we're first in natural gas production on federal land, second in federal oil production, the millions of dollars that we're seeing already in lost revenues, the fact that we're seeing some of the producers say that they're going to indefinitely pause their operations on federal lands. And we know that this is very much an effort by the Biden administration to end completely, I think, to end fossil fuels. They're beginning this process by ending leasing and production on federal lands every possible way they can. And it's really unfortunate that we've found ourselves in a situation where, you know, the things that we all have been saying that we knew would happen, sadly are happening. And we lived through this to some extent during the Obama administration when there was a similar effort made. I think this is even more dangerous now because, frankly, they're building on some of the things that were done in the past. And I think that the efforts are going to require us, now that we've gone from a position where we were energy independent to a position where we no longer are, to a position where we're seeing inflation, we're seeing these rising prices at the pump, and the really detrimental energy policies. I'd be interested in hearing from our witnesses, based upon some of the lessons that we learned when we went from the Obama administration to the Trump administration policies on energy and the benefits that those brought. If you look now at where we are, and certainly we in Congress are going to continue to fight and introduce legislation. I've introduced legislation, for example, that would prohibit bans on oil and gas leasing on public lands, that would maintain royalty rates at 12.5%. But if you look at what we can do now, what would you say are some of the most effective things we can do now to make sure that we're fighting against these policies and that we're prepared to make sure that the industry can recover as effectively as possible, hopefully in the not too distant future, once we have better policies, better leadership in place? Maybe I'll go to Kathleen for that question initially.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I really appreciate it. You know, luckily, the Build Back Better Act didn't pass, the House version, because I honestly don't see how anybody could operate on new leases with all the provisions there. So I do think that it's really positive that that didn't happen, but we expect to see the administration do rulemaking to do several of the things that were in there, like raise royalty rates, rents, bonuses, adding in a new nomination fee. And so there's all these additional costs that they're planning to put in place, which I'm not sure if we can stop that rulemaking. But I think what was effective during the Trump administration, and to some extent, it's not positive because we have this whiplash between different administrations. But there were rules put in place during the Trump administration that did rescind some of these harmful rulemakings. And so I would hope that we can do that in the future, but I'm not sure there's a lot we can do with how gridlocked Congress is to stop them from moving forward with increasing costs on federal lands. That has been one of their big priorities, and I'm not sure that I have a simple solution for stopping that.
Well, I think it's just such a critically important issue. I think what you all are doing in terms of helping to educate the public about the benefits of American fossil fuels, as you've said, they're the cleanest in the world. And certainly, you know, when you look at what we're dealing with now in terms of Russia on the verge of invading Ukraine, and the fact that we've, you know, now the Biden administration has given the go-ahead for Nord Stream 2, but is preventing us from developing and continuing to build our own pipelines here at home, just makes no sense at all. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you for your participation, and we'll certainly all, I know, keep fighting on behalf of what really are national treasures, our American fossil fuels. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate your questions. Next, we have the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa. Then following Doug, we'll have Ms. Lesko, Mr. Keller, and Mr. Fallon. Doug, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman Dan. Appreciate it. I'm glad to be able to join the panel here amongst a lot of things happening today. I appreciate this subject matter, extremely important. Let me tell you how messed up California is. I know it's not going to be a news flash for most here, but we have overgrown forests that are a source of massive wildfire every year, as we probably have common in other Western states. That's a source of fuel, biomass, that could be put to work generating 24/7 power. And I call it that because when you have wind and solar, it only is reliable when you have wind and the sun's up, which, you know, those are limited cases. So we also have abundant geothermal. We have nuclear power plants in California that the first one's been shut down a few years ago, the second one soon. They're trying to take out hydroelectric dams. So I don't know what California's answer to anything is. On the way to the airport, I see the national average is like 321. Last gas station at the airport was like 540 a gallon. So, it's just mind-boggling what this Biden administration is thinking they're doing to help the American people in any fashion. Nord Stream, all the comments earlier, good comments on what that does to natural gas. We have California cities banning the use of natural gas in new construction. They want to make everybody be allowed electricity. At the same time, we have power shutoffs for 2 reasons. Either when there's a high grid need during the summer when it gets hot and they have to start shutting people down voluntarily or not voluntarily, or when the wind blows in a forested area and trees and branches are going to fall on the power lines because it might cause fire, they have public safety power shutoffs. It's a recipe for a third world disaster, the way things are run there. So what I'm looking at is that if you want to have 24/7 power, you need sources that you can always count on. If we're using biomass, which is not cheap, moving it to areas where they can stockpile it and run those types of power plants, it looks like that would be a win. Natural gas, continuing to develop that very clean burning fossil fuel, as was just mentioned by Ms. Cheney. We have good ways to do things that are better than in the past. Can anybody on the panel comment on how much cleaner we are per unit of energy produced than what we were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, because we don't seem to get any credit in improvements on power plants using cleaner fuel and all that over years ago. And why isn't this a message that we can be getting out there more like, hey, we don't have to turn all cars into electric. Cars run much cleaner than they ever did. Please, panelists, what can we be doing to improve our message and get this back to the Biden administration, which interestingly, their Secretary of Interior at another meeting Dan hosted for us did express that there's those in the Biden administration are talking about nuclear positively. So panelists, please, some of these we saw the other day at that last meeting, but please comment on what direction we could be going with this that makes sense.
Congressman, just to put a finer point on that, in the United States between 1970 and 2017, which we need to update it, but we have increased our GDP by over 250%. Vehicle miles traveled has increased by nearly 200%. Energy consumption has increased by nearly 60%. Our population increased by nearly 45%. But during that same period, total emissions from 6 of the criteria air pollutants dropped by 73%. So that's just an example of how much cleaner our air is, for example. We talked about emissions earlier. We have an amazing story to tell. If you listen to the environmental groups and the pressure groups, you would think that we were choking on our air and our rivers were on fire, right? I mean, this is the sort of rhetoric that we hear. It's not the case at all. And you're right. I mean, the public just really, I think they intuitively understand it, but they don't believe it sometimes because they're dished with this constant drumbeat of like doomsday. So that's just an idea, just tell the story, right? Tell the good news story. And these are EPA numbers, by the way. These aren't our numbers.
Yeah. That's Thomas Pyle, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great numbers. And that's part of the story, because although we've used, so, those usage have come up with population and more, automation, things like that. The numbers of pollutant per unit or even overall, as you say, has gone down. We need to talk about that. Would your office mind sending mine this information that you might have already compiled? Because these are the things we need to be speaking about in our floor time and committee time, and getting it out in the public that say, you know what, this massive electrification that they're pushing upon us. And it's really frustrating to watch the automakers, for example, oh yeah, we can electrify everything by the year 2035. This is like they did back in the Obama era when they said we can average 54.5 miles per gallon for our whole fleet by the year 2025. They just went along with it because they didn't want to make anybody upset amongst the regulators. It's ridiculous. Do you even know what a 54.5 mile per gallon vehicle looks like? Other than those little two like double coffin cars you see running around. Nobody wants those cars. Nobody really even wants electric cars unless you're, like a social justice person or something like that. People like what they have to drive, and the continued efficiency of better cleaning, better burning, as well as more power and cleaner burning. It keeps advancing if we allow it to advance. So, anybody else on the panel want to touch on that a little bit? Because, or anybody on the nuclear power, as the Secretary of Energy, she was saying this the other day.
Congressman, I won't speak to nuclear, but I would love to have my office send to yours all of the technologies that result in lower carbon that our members work on and all of that. So, for example, Halliburton and Schlumberger and some of these oilfield service providers, they're only associated with hydraulic fracturing, are really developing technologies that are making our air and water cleaner. And we have a list of all of these things these companies do, and they're impactful as talking points. So we'd love to send that to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Leslie?
Yes, sir.
Is it focused just on carbon or all the other, I'll call them real?
All of the other, there's all emissions.
Okay, good. Because I'm still not playing the carbon game along with everybody else. I think CO2 is not this massive pollutant that's somebody declared 10 or 15 years ago. Trees dig it, So
right.
Anyway.
You think it's a building block of life, which it is.
Yeah, it kind of is, when like you see the alien movies, like, well, carbon life form, what do you anyway. So thank you. I'll yield it back to Dan before he stops me here. So thanks, everybody.
No way, Doug. Thank you very much. Next, let's go to Debbie Lesko from Arizona. Hey, Debbie.
Hi, Dan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panelists that are here. My question, I agree with everybody's statements about how crazy the Biden administration is, so I'm not going to repeat that. But I do have a question. How is ESG, environmental social governance, affecting capital financing, the policies that energy companies are coming up with, and energy costs? And I don't know who to ask the question of, so you guys will just have to fight to answer it.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate the question. So I think our member companies certainly appreciate the ability to do some ESG reporting, because it gives us a chance to talk about what we heard Mr. LaMalfa and others talk about, which is our great success in reducing emissions and reducing the footprint on the land and all the things we're doing to recycle water. So it does give us an opportunity to highlight all the positive things we're doing in the community and to reduce emissions and reduce environmental impact. However, what we're seeing now is ESG being used as a weapon. We're seeing agencies that are going to regulate and impose ESG reporting and climate change disclosure with the intention of disadvantaging oil and natural gas development in particular, but other politically disfavored industries. So using ESG as a weapon to decapitalize the industry. And that's what we're working on, and that's what we're fighting against. Because if ESG is done in a productive manner, it's great. But if it's weaponized and meant to reorient the market system so that it disadvantages some the fossil fuels that provide over 84% of the globe's energy, then it is not a productive force. And the outcome would be worse for humanity than, what they're projecting would happen if we don't kill all fossil fuels. I'm sorry, I didn't say that very correctly. What I'm saying is, like, if we just took away the energy that people use, humanity would be much worse off than some speculative claims in year 2100.
I'd like to put a sharper point on it, if I might, just briefly. I think this is the newest avenue of the activist the political left to do just what Kathleen described, which is to try to put fossil fuel out of business. And I believe that as much as the policies of an administration like the Biden administration, that could have as big or a bigger impact on the future. I saw the other day the Secretary of Treasury of West Virginia stood up against Larry Fink, for example, at BlackRock. So he's no longer going to use his products. I think more of that has to happen. I think we need to start standing up to some of this. When you cross that line and ESG becomes a political tool to advance the left's agenda, that hurts all of your constituents across the board, not just folks who are in the production states. And that is a big thing to be looking at on the horizon as a threat.
I would just add as well, with the companies that I work with, who it hurts mainly, while there are opportunities certainly to disclose the great things we're doing, it does damage the smaller companies more significantly than the larger, because they do not have the resources to really gather all the metrics that are required for effective and appropriate reporting and understanding scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. I mean, we have a certification program built to educate companies on this right now, and that is discretionary funds that they don't have, not only because of the pandemic, but because of what's happening in the industry. So while it does create an opportunity to talk about the great things we're doing, not just environmentally, but also within our governance and social aspects, it certainly hurts smaller companies.
Yeah, and Thomas, I think you are right. We need to be more vocal about this, because they're trying to cut off a certain industry. And it's very evident to me. I have one more question, and that is, there's been a lot of legislation that Republicans have sponsored that have gone nowhere. But is there any legislation that you can think of that hasn't been sponsored already that should be sponsored, and something that Republicans can work on when we get back the majority?
I think something that would be great is just a commitment, again, as there was in 2015, to not pursue energy subsidies through the tax code. And that's across the board. I think what we need for a competitive energy industry in the United States, an innovative energy industry, is, just broadly available pro-growth tax policy, rather than trying to push energy policy through the tax code. I know that is not a politically correct thing to say, but as I see it, that's good for the taxpayer, it's good for the consumer, and it's better long-term energy policy.
I would add just very briefly, and I actually had a piece in the Washington Times on this. I think the courts are starting to rein in the regulators a little bit with the Chevron deference. In the vaccine mandate case, it made it clear that regulators are no longer going to have carte blanche to interpret the rules that you guys make. And I think that'll create more opportunities and open the door for the legislation that you mentioned is in the graveyard, right? That they're going to start forcing the Congress, and putting pressure on the Congress to interpret these regulations. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that we'll get back to, as Congresswoman Cheney mentioned, saying what you guys mean, like telling the executive branch, this is what we want. You either enforce it, or we will enforce you to enforce it. So I'm optimistic. I know it's been a little bit crazy up there in the last few years, but I really feel like we have a great opportunity in the future for you guys to put your stamp on energy policy in a positive pro-market way and pro-consumer way.
Oh, thank you, all of you. Now I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Lesko. Good questions. Next, we're going to turn to Mr. Keller from Pennsylvania, and then following him will be Mr. Fallon, Mr. Carter, Mr. Franklin, and Ms. Harrow. Fred?
Thank you. And thank you to the Chairman Newhouse and Ranking Member Comer for holding this very valuable forum. And I want to thank the witnesses for taking time to discuss this topic with all of us. Last October, my colleagues and I sent a letter to the Department of Energy Secretary Granholm voicing concern over the U.S. Energy Information Administration's forecast for energy prices over the course of this winter. In the department's reply, Secretary Granholm stated, the U.S. government does not manage production levels of natural gas, crude, or refined products. While this is true, that same U.S. government led by the Biden administration does impose regulations on domestic energy producers that directly contribute to decreased supply and drive up prices. The letter also states, we will be ready to act if the situation warrants it. After dipping into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we've seen negligible effects on the price of fuel. Meanwhile, Americans are forced to use more of their savings to cover heating and fuel costs in an era now defined by Democrat policies of fuel shortages and runaway inflation. I would urge the current administration and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to support policies that prioritize American energy first rather than OPEC plus and our adversaries. For instance, last year, the president allowed the Russian Nord Stream 2 pipeline to move forward while making every effort to limit American energy production. So actually, Ms. Beyer, I just wanted to ask a question. Thank you for being with us. I represent an area with abundant natural gas resources across Pennsylvania. Can you explain the benefits of the natural gas resources in communities like the ones I represent?
The benefits of having those resources there are not only for the affordable, reliable energy that your constituents have, but the jobs that creates. You know, a lot of the work that we do here at the council is around the jobs that the natural gas industry has. And, you know, I think that is the benefit, is the economic development in your district of what that provides and what that gives to the rest of the US and what it could give to the rest of the Northeast that needs that clean energy. So I think it's truly about jobs, and it's about, you know, being able to support our modern way of life there, certainly with natural gas. And we do need to be promoting that more and talking about that more. I think we feel like we do. Sometimes we feel like we're hitting our heads against the wall when we talk about clean natural gas. But that's the message. And ultimately, what makes it beneficial is what it does for the people there.
Yeah, I would actually say, and I really appreciate members of the Western Caucus. I know Chairman Newhouse visited Northeastern Pennsylvania. And in addition to the benefits of the affordability of the abundant resource we have, the educational opportunities for the next generation are just limitless. I mean, we saw CDL courses being built with dollars from natural gas companies that were invested in CTE education. We saw the School for Petroleum and Natural Gas that are educating students in about 2 years education, and they're earning $70,000 a year when they get done with that education. And I think that's an important thing for us to make sure we're talking about, because we all want, I mean, we all talk about this. We all talk about jobs when we run for office, but then people get to Washington, D.C. and they demonize those very job creators, and they're not mutually exclusive. You got to have good jobs. And I think the American energy industry, in addition to the benefits of low cost energy, the educational factor, the ability for people to earn a living, but it's also a national security concern. And I don't know if you'd agree with that, Ms. Beyer, or not, but that's really how I see it.
Absolutely. And those are high paying jobs. higher paying jobs than in other industries, and certainly contributes to our national security. As we've talked about, we need to protect our energy security and can export that natural gas. We've outfitted all of our LNG export terminals now at this point. We're ready to export more to our allies. And that only enhances our energy security and our national security. I agree.
Yeah, and the educational part, I would just add to that, with very, very little college debt, because some of these individuals are getting internships while they're getting their education, and they're not graduating with the debt. So everybody talks about college and the cost of that. Here's an opportunity for individuals that are either entering the workforce or changing careers to really have success. And I just have other thing, just from your perspective, what has been the impact of increased natural gas production innovation on carbon emissions?
It has obviously reduced emissions. And we just talked about some of the metrics on that are so impressive, that our industry continues to try to promote how we've increased production and simultaneously reduced emissions. And that is a US positive clean energy story. That is the energy transition story. The way we like to talk about it is the reduction of emissions while supplying demand. And so, we have been able to reduce those emissions, and that is a great success story, certainly from your area of the country.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I just want to thank Ranking Member Comer and Chairman Newhouse for their work on this and having this important forum. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Fred. Good questions. Now we turn to the gentleman from the great state of Texas, I believe is on, Mr. Fallon. Pat, floor is yours for 3 minutes. Well, he was there a second ago. We'll come back to him in a minute. So I'll turn to my good friend from Georgia, my co-sponsor of the Make Energy Affordable Act, which I described earlier, Mr. Buddy Carter. Welcome, Buddy. I'll turn it over to you for 3 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this is my first participation in the Western Caucus. Someone who represents the entire coast of Georgia, the Atlantic Seaboard, and the Western Caucus. Go figure.
We are.
But I will say this: energy prices impact all of us, and they particularly impact us on the state of Georgia. In fact, I've got two metropolitan areas in my district, Savannah and Brunswick, and we actually have the highest price per gallon of gasoline of any metro area in the state of Georgia, even more so than the Atlanta metro area. And that's important because we have two major seaports in my district, the Port of Savannah and the Port of Brunswick. And they are economic engines of our state and of the whole region of the Southeast United States. So the impact that higher energy prices have on us is significant, and that's very important. As you mentioned, Chairman Newhouse, you and I have co-authored the Make Energy Affordable Act, and essentially what it does, as I'm sure you went over earlier, is just to create is to charge the Biden administration to create a report on rising energy prices in the U.S. and a plan on how to combat it. I guess my question to the panel, and when specifically, but to the panel in general, is any of your interactions with the administration, how seriously do you think they're taking this issue, the issue of increasing energy prices, and do they recognize that the increase is a result of their failed policies? Leslie, I see you looking and pondering, so I'll ask you first.
I was waiting for Thomas to come off mute, sir. No, I'm just kidding. I believe that they're concerned about it because they know that is certainly going to impact their ability in elections, but they're obviously looking at it wrong. They continue to return back to this conversation with OPEC, which is just, as we've all noted, is unthinkable. Why we want to have foreign sources, foreign countries producing our energy when we could be producing it here. In our interactions with them, which have been limited, unfortunately, They have tended to say, look, we support your desire to contribute to technology that's going to get to our environmental goals, but we also are against you getting capital, you being able to get capital. And so that's tough. They don't think that increasing, I don't believe that this administration believes that increasing domestic production is going to help. And then they show a very unrealistic understanding of it when they did turn around a few months ago and say, no, we want you to start producing immediately right now. And you shouldn't be returning cash to your shareholders, which is something that we've had to do. We've needed capital discipline in this industry. So I think they're a little bit all over the place. And a lot of that's coming from the NSC. There aren't any industry veterans, hardly at all, anywhere in the administration, except for maybe one individual at Interior. So I think they just have a limited understanding of what's actually going to help pricing.
But it seems like they're doing everything they can to make prices higher. I mean, it's obviously a war on fossil fuels. And Thomas, you have anything to add to it?
No, Leslie said that very diplomatically, much better than I could have. The fact is, the administration really doesn't seek my counsel on these issues, unfortunately. But I think that the pattern is pretty simple. Understate the problem, blame everybody else, and then when they realize they've got a real political problem on their hands, give lip service to it. This idea of releasing oil from the strategic reserve to reduce pressure on prices is ridiculous. The president himself even said it in a town hall on CNN a few weeks before he did it. The same with food prices. They're blaming greedy meat conglomerates. I mean, these are systematic inflationary. These are problems that are inherent in the economy now. First, they said it was temporary, then they got rid of the word temporary, and now they're having a press conference probably right now to reset. Right, a year in, here we are a year later, and all the things we talked about during this forum. These aren't going away anytime soon, and your constituents are going to get hit, all of your constituents, and especially the poorest among us. They pay the highest percentage of their monthly budgets just to meet their basic energy needs, 30% in the lower income brackets. That means they have to make choices between heat and medicine or food, or God forbid, a vacation, right, in the middle of all of this stuff. So they understand it to the extent that it's a political problem, but as I stated in my opening testimony, this is their plan. It's working, right? They want to make these prices higher, and the results are so that they can put pressure on the conventional energy resources to make the other stuff that they prefer seem to be able to compete on a price level.
Okay. Let me cut to the chase. I've only got one more question, but it's a very important one. And let me preface it by saying, look, I serve on the Select Committee for Climate Change, and I believe in climate change. I believe that man has a part of it. I don't think, I think it's cyclical. I don't think that our part of it. I certainly don't think the United States gets the credit that we deserve for the carbon reductions that we have made over the past decade. I mean, over the past decade, we've decreased our carbon emissions more than the next 12 countries combined, and while growing our economy. But I'm honored. I've been selected as the Georgia Conservative Clean Energy Award of the Year. And that's great, and I take it very seriously. I'm not making light of that. I'm very proud of that. But at the same time, I guess the question I have for y'all is this: Can we indeed reduce emissions in the United States even more than we have? And look, I'm not talking about the global problem. I get it. I know that for every ton of CO CO2 that we decrease out of the atmosphere, that China is putting 4 tons in. And that makes no sense whatsoever. It's got to be a global solution. But can we in the United States decrease our emissions while not dramatically increasing prices, energy prices? Can that be done?
Absolutely. I'll speak unless anyone else wants to go. Not only can we do that here in the US, but exporting our natural gas that we have to the rest of the world, that already decreases emissions by displacing coal. So, that in and of itself decreases emissions. And then here in the US, we can continue to ramp up production with the technology that's coming out of our industry. That's why I said clean energy starts with us. We're the ones that understand the scale and the technology. So I believe we can.
And Leslie, I appreciate that. And I think you're right. The point is that, they are stopping us from exporting our natural gas. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I got to tell you, from a Republican perspective, from a conservative perspective, this is an important issue politically for young people. I mean, whether we like it or not, it is. And we, as conservatives, we got to address this. And I think we can do it, but it's got to be a global solution. But if they're going to cut off all of our exports of the cleaner natural gas and of cleaner energy that we're exporting, and all of the innovation that we've been able to make here, and the progress in innovation that we've been able to make here in America, we're not going to solve this globally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carter.
I'll yield back unless somebody's got a response to that. Evidently not. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And just let me say, buddy, we are just honored to have someone of your stature on the Western Caucus representing one of the most easternmost points of the United States. So thanks for your participation today.
Yeah, and you appreciate my dues as well. I get it.
Absolutely. So next we're going to go to Mr. Fallon from Texas, and then following Pat, we'll have Mr. Franklin, Ms. Harrell, and Mr. Rosendale. Mr. Franklin, or excuse me, Mr. Fallon.
You know what, Mr. Chair, I'll take that confusion because Mr. Franklin is much more handsome than me. But well, thank you all for being willing to visit with us. And I just had a comment and then a few easy questions here, quick questions. But I find it interesting that the left doesn't want America to produce energy when we are the ones. If you are an environmentalist, you should want America to produce energy because we do it cleaner. We have the technical expertise. We have an experienced labor force. We operate under fair labor practices. We have a rule of law, an independent judiciary, and an active environmentalist lobby. And if we were ever going to extract resources from the earth, it should be the way in which the Americans do it rather than countries, that don't have any of what I just mentioned, like Iran and Venezuela and Russia and China et al. But I remember when Secretary Pompeo visited with the conference, and he said that in his international negotiations with other nation states, the fact that America was energy independent and exploiting our resources efficiently was it gave him latitude. And it gave him leverage over other nation states. And it's remarkable to me that the left is blind to this. And I remember energy independence as a kid and how it seemed like a pipe dream 40 years ago. And yet here we are on the cusp and this administration fumbles it. So, Ms. Tubb, do you believe that energy independence is a national security issue?
I think there's certainly benefits to it. I think what I would reframe that as a robust, competitive energy market, because we don't want to be an island. We have a great partner in energy to our northern border, and I think there's robust benefits to American consumers to have a free and open energy market. That said, I think there are huge benefits in the foreign policy side of this when the American government can come to an energy poor state and say, here is the American market. What can we do to reduce regulatory barriers to open up those markets to your customers? Knowing that country can rely on the US to use energy, not as a political tool for leverage, but as a vehicle for freedom. And we're seeing the exact opposite right now in Europe, where Russia is using energy markets to leverage weaker states to a political end that they prefer. That's not a place we want to be in, I think.
No, I think that's an interesting take. Is energy independence, while important, yeah, we're not an island. We want to, import, export, partner in a fair trade and free market environment. So it's a very good way to spin it and look at it. Mr. Pyle, because we've heard different and varying numbers when we talk about the Keystone Pipeline, and how many jobs did we lose, and what are we talking about as an impact to the sector and the economy as a whole? I mean, we greenlight, well, not we, but Biden greenlights Nord Stream 2 and looks the other way, and just to what Stu said about giving Putin more leverage. And then here we're shutting and hamstringing ourselves. It just doesn't make any sense. And I'd like to, when I talk to my constituents, let them know I want to be accurate with what we're talking about here, and jobs lost, and also the hits to our GDP.
Congressman Fallon, I don't have the total job loss number on top of my head, but I do have the numbers, and I'll provide them for your office. I know.
Thank you.
I know off the top it was several thousand who were furloughed right away, and I know that the company has actually sued under NAFTA to try to recoup some of their losses for this, and I suspect they will help some of their employees if they get the revenue. But I call this the tale of two pipelines. You could not have a more bizarre, has been mentioned, juxtaposition of policy. The Keystone Pipeline would provide a long-term link to our northern neighbor to enhance, as Katie said, energy security in North America, right? And then you have greenlighting what were already sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Now the administration is saying, well, in order to provide leverage against Russia's aggressions in Ukraine, that they're going to threaten sanctions on the Nord Stream 2. They lifted them. They already gave away their leverage literally like 3 or 4 days after they canceled the Keystone Pipeline. So it is the most sort of striking example of what's wrong with both energy policy in America under this administration and foreign policy in America under this administration at the exact
just to add an exclamation point to what you just said, it's remarkably inconsistent and astonishingly incompetent. And it's a danger. It's really weakening. Are we going to put America first, or are we going to put America last? I just did a town hall where a constituent came up and asked me that. It's a great question. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fallon. We're going to go to the gentleman from Montana next. Mr. Rosendale, thanks for joining us. Matt, the floor is yours for 3 minutes. Matt, you're on, sir.
Oh, he's on 1 minute.
We all clear? Can we take this one off? Sorry, folks, I'm doing 2 hearings at the exact same time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you bringing me on today. And thank you all the witnesses for joining us today and sharing your insight on this very important issue. I know that I'm echoing the sentiments of many of my colleagues on the call here today, but I cannot emphasize enough how impactful energy and fuel prices are on all aspects of our lives. So thank you, Chairman Newhouse, Ranking Member Comer, and Ranking Member Norman for arranging this forum for us to conduct much needed congressional oversight over this disastrous administration. Since his first days in office, President Biden imposed a destructive moratorium on oil and gas leases on federal land, which, by the way, the courts did rule as illegal. He shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, which hundreds of miles would have passed through the state of Montana, and began reviewing and rolling back Trump-era energy policies that had put us on a path to prosperity and self-reliance. Make no mistake, Biden's policies cost jobs, decreased tax revenue, and have worsened inflation. Instead of looking at ways to fix the problems created by his administration, President Biden and House Democrats are focused on expanding the regulatory state and burying the energy industry under even more red tape, bureaucracy, and increased fees. And they wonder why inflation is surging. Rising oil prices affect the cost of virtually every consumer good, plastics or petroleum byproducts, and heavily dependent on the price of oil. 2/3 of farm equipment are powered by diesel engines, so the cost of food reflects increased oil cost. Not to mention, nearly everything sold at retail store is transported at some point by a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. As I've said 1,000 times, President Biden's ineffective and regressive policies will hurt those who can afford it the least. And with that, Ms. Reams, can you elaborate on how regulatory proposals from the Biden administration would impact the energy industry and in turn consumers?
There was a little bit of disruption there, Congressman. Could you repeat that question?
Absolutely. I heard somebody give a hoorah there. I thought they were cheering for me. Can you elaborate on how the regulatory proposals from the Biden administration would impact the energy industry and in turn consumers?
Absolutely. The more onerous the regulation, obviously, the more obstacles, the more expensive it becomes, the scarcer the products that we have. And this isn't Heather Reams at Crest. This is economics 101 that somehow this administration tends to ignore. Ironically, through the proposals of this administration, we have more demand, and we're using more oil, more gas, more coal. Coal's making a surge and a comeback. So it makes you wonder who's in charge and what their intent is from the administration. But reducing regulations is one of the single most clear ways of just reducing obstacles so that the market can perform in a way that it should. And a competition of products, of services, of ideas is something that the U.S. has been built on and something that my organization supports wholly.
You're still muted, Matt. Matt, there you go.
Yep, I'm back. Sorry. What I've seen is many times the additional regulations that get added to the marketplace will choke out the smaller competitors, which a lot of times is where a lot of the innovation comes from. Changing gears a little bit, Ms. Tubb, the left is aggressively pushing to eliminate traditional energy. Can you speak to the feasibility of doing this in the short to medium term, and why will traditional energy always be part of our energy portfolio?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think it's a great point of education for Americans to realize that 80% of our energy needs, so that's heat, power, and fuel, come from coal, oil, natural gas. 80%. So that's not going to change tomorrow, let alone on some political timeline that has a catchy slogan to it. Maybe just one example of how this plays out. So the EIA, when they put out their short-term energy outlooks, they were looking at price trends for coal, oil, natural gas, and they found that coal over the years has declined both in production, consumption, and prices, and that a lot of that has to do with competitive natural gas, but a lot of it has to do with federal regulation through the EPA and state renewable portfolio standards that box out coal as a resource. What's interesting to me, as Heather mentioned earlier, coal use has increased in the last couple of years through the pandemic, not just in the US, but globally. And similarly, prices have moderately increased for coal. But what I find interesting is the EIA noted that the increase wasn't as much as they would expect in a world with very high natural gas prices. And so what they're noticing is that these policies have prevented energy providers from switching to more affordable fuels. And the flip side of that is it's artificially increased demand for natural gas, which inhibits, the decrease in prices. So my point is these policies have totally screwed up energy markets, and the one who has to bear the cost at the end of the day is the consumer. And so connecting those dots for people, I think, is really important, that policy does have consequences, even when it comes through opaque EPA regulations.
Mr. Chair, I know that I'm running a little bit close to my time, so I want to thank you for bringing this panel together and thank everyone for all the information that they're sharing with us to bring this very important subject to greater attention to the general public. And I would yield back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. Thanks for your participation today. Next, we're going to go to the lady from New Mexico, Matt Harrell.
Thank you.
3 minutes, you bet.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. And just, this is so refreshing to actually talk to people with common sense who understand how energy impacts not only our communities, but our environment and just our national defense. And I'm really excited that last week, Natural Resources Committee Ranking Member Bruce Westerman and I and other committee colleagues sent a letter to the Interior Secretary Holland regarding the delays in approving the necessary oil and gas drilling permits. So, I mean, I just want the committee, the witnesses to know we've got your back, and it's just refreshing again to have your resources and your knowledge. So when we go and fight the fight. But I have a question for Ms. Sgamma, and it's so good to see you. It's been a while. But I wanted to ask you, can you explain to the members here today how delays in permitting negatively impact producers you represent, and how these delays make producing energy on federal lands less attractive?
Well, the permits are certainly slow to come. And that's kind of the tip of the last step, really, because sometimes you can spend years getting through the environmental analysis and various surveys, and there can be years of prep work that need to go into getting a permit. So when every stage along the way can take months, years in several cases, then it does get frustrating. And as a result, we end up having to request more permits than we may ultimately use, because when it takes you 2 years to get through the process, you don't have certainty that in 2 years you're going to need those permits, because market conditions can change or whatever can change. So we often get beat up by having permits in hand that may not ultimately get used. And the only reason is because the system is so inefficient. Whereas if we're on the time scale of states where it takes a couple months to get a permit, then you don't have to have them in hand. You know, you have some certainty about getting permits. But right now, I mean, it's a constant struggle on federal lands. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and I'll just be brief because I know I'm almost out of time, but it really begs the question why it takes 12, 18, 19 months on public land to get permits, when we know when the government wants to, they're quite capable of sending out billions of dollars in relief fund all over the country to individual, they can get things done fast when they want to. So such a disadvantage of where they place our energy sector. So Mr. Chairman and other members that hosted this, thank you so much for this. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask a few questions, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Harrell. As chairman, I reserve the right to ask a question as well. So I'm going to just throw a question out there for all of you as we're getting winding up to getting close to the end of our discussion. There's been a lot of great questions today, and I really appreciate the many responses. We've been talking about some of the policies that are being pursued by the Biden administration, and the fact that I think that some of these policies have actually pushed energy development to other countries overseas. So just throw out the question, if you guys could think about and maybe express a little bit how these policies impact our own climate goals here in the United States, and how we could or should better focus on domestic production to advance not only those climate goals, but also our own energy leadership. So kind of a general question, but think holistically here. Can I pick on you first, Heather?
Yeah, you can pick on me. I love to talk about climate and the misguided policies of this administration, but supporting some kind of climate goals. The idea that, the United States is, it's a global, climate change is a global issue. It's not a US issue. And the idea we can get to net zero tomorrow here in the United States, but we still have to look at the rest of the world. And the developing nations are the ones that are going to be continuing to develop Are we not going to allow them to develop? Are we not going to allow them to have enhanced medical care or education as the result of energy and better outcomes for children? As a mother, I'm outraged to think that we want to keep countries from developing because they're not using the right kind of fuel to their economy. So this is energy realism. They're going to use some kind of electricity, some kind of fuel to fill in that electricity, and it needs to be, a lower carbon alternative. It has to be that. And right now, that's natural gas, bar none. And we should be incenting our markets to do as much as we can here at home. We should be incenting our corporations to be able to come up with technologies that continue to make it lower and lower so that we are exporting our innovations, not our jobs, number one. And then the other piece I think is just, overall, you get into some of this, where we are moving in an energy transition. But note this, we have never gotten rid of any kind of energy we've ever used. We still burn wood. Right today, it's always been additive. And to think about, what are all of a sudden now in our history, we're going to start cutting off certain kinds of energy because it's not politically popular because some group tells us so. I think it's just wrong-headed. And I think a lot of us here are scratching our heads trying to make sense of this administration when it doesn't make sense because we've never done this in history before. So we just need to get real about what direction we're going in as a country and how we can help guide other nations and help their technology. I also make this akin to like a cell phone. There are a lot of nations that never used a landline. They never had it. They went straight to cell phones. They shortened that time of that technology. It's the same thing we can do with energy technology. We can hopscotch, jump to something that's cleaner and better for the world. And that's American leadership. That's American production. That's what we all should be working towards. And unfortunately, this administration is using past policies, dated policies that really have no business in today's political marketplace environment. It's incredibly frustrating. It's an organization that does support reducing emissions, recognizes that the climate is an issue, a political issue, a real issue. We're just going in the wrong direction.
Great. Good point. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else? Kathleen, any thoughts?
Yeah, I really was discouraged when Senator Warren sent out a request to several different companies asking about how much LNG they had exported. Because again, we all recognize that climate is a global issue. It's not just about reducing emissions here in the United States. So if we can export natural gas to Poland and Japan, then we export greenhouse gas reductions as well. So it's really discouraging when the other side comes down on natural gas because it's a practical solution. And it's not the top-down government COP26 type of policy, which doesn't work. It's the actual reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which is where the United States is a leader in the world. But Senator Warren and others don't want to recognize that actual reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. They just want to recognize when the government controls it. And I think that's the real agenda, which is disappointing.
That is disappointing. Mr. Pyle, have you got a thought you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, and I know Katie touched on this earlier. I worry about what I call the death spiral of subsidization. What we've seen in energy markets is certain energy types getting subsidies, the market gets distorted. Another one says, okay, well, they got theirs, so we want ours, and then they get the subsidies. And what I worry about is that we're bypassing the opportunities that we don't know exist yet. It's like Steve Jobs said, we didn't know we needed this thing, right? And I worry that by spending so much focus and as Kathleen said, the government sort of involving itself in, pick this choice or pick that source, that we may be denying ourselves that amazing thing in the future that we don't know exists yet. But if the market forces were working more effectively, if consumers with their choices and their preferences, and that includes the environment, were the primary focus of these decisions, I think we would continue to both provide low cost, affordable, reliable energy and continue to improve the environment, because we can do both. We have done both. And so I think that getting the government, A, out of the way, and B, to start unwinding their involvement in the sector would go a long way towards achieving all these goals simultaneously.
Good. Thank you very much, Thomas. Ms. Beyer, Ms. Tubb, any comments you'd like to make before we close?
Thank you. I would add that we've seen this administration run this thread through every action, at the State Department. Now the Bureau of Energy and Natural Resources is different. The SEC, is starting to put these onerous ESG regulations. They're running it throughout the entire administration and making it such a huge just disincentivizing what we produce. And like Heather hit it on the head, for the growing demand globally. And we need to be able to deliver on that for our own national security, for our energy security. But absolutely, if we can just stop disrupting the markets and let them do what they need to do, and letting our industry have the access to capital to be able to invest and develop these technologies, we'll continue to produce and reduce emissions. And that's going to help the global community as demand increases. So thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
I think I'd maybe just try and sum up what we're all trying to say is, that the solution is simple. It's doing an about face on energy policy, that turns away from mandates and allows the customer and the producer space to breathe and to innovate and to push the market in directions, like Tom said, that we can't even imagine where that will go. So it's simple. It's not easy, but I think it's quite clear that when politicians and policymakers try to manhandle the economy and the energy sector in a direction, there's all kinds of fallout. And right now what we're seeing is, unfortunately, American customers and businesses are paying the consequences for that. Don't think it's a hopeless case. I think there's plenty of time to turn the ship, but I think it requires a fundamental reorientation of how we look at the energy sector and the customer.
Good, Katie. Well, appreciate you ending on an optimistic note. So thank you very much for that. It's been a great conversation. I think it's pretty clear to me that it's very important that this administration stops picking energy winners and losers. We've got to stop stifling energy innovations, just like what you guys have been saying. We've got to encourage and invest in energy projects and cut back on some of the duplicative and onerous regulations that we've been seeing. It really allow the energy industry to just meet the needs of a growing economy and put the consumers in the driver's seat. So as we close today, I just again want to thank all of our panelists for taking time out of your busy days to be with us today to talk about something that truly is important, and I think we can safely say on the minds of every single American today. So I really appreciate all of our member involvement today as well. That's been awesome. Let me just say, I look forward to working with all of you and look for future opportunities to help us secure affordable and reliable energy. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.